So I'm going to speak to you about some best practices we at Nexmo learned while building mobile SDKs. And this doesn't work. OK. So just a little bit about me. So what we do at Nexmo now, I'm responsible for building the Android layer for a two-factor authentication SDK and then an in-app messaging SDK. But I actually started as a Symbian developer. I was building Symbian apps, if anybody remembers the good old OV suite, the OV contacts. And then I moved on to building cross-platform SDK. It was a cross-platform tool called Mosync. They were the main competitors of PhoneGap. Maybe you've heard of PhoneGap. So let's see what we are going to cover today. So we are going to draw the line between the terms SDK and library. And then we're going to switch from the developer perspective, which is the user that tries to integrate a library, and see how to manage this library and how to handle its permissions. And then we're going to switch off back to the creator of the library, the developer. And we are going to take into consideration some points regarding responsibility of the dependency, failure handling, and how to publish on Maven Central. So what is the difference actually between SDK and library? There is no actual definition. There is a thin line between them. But for me, like I used to call a library a small chunk of reusable code, like for instance, swipe to refresh. Whereas an SDK is still a library, but it can have much more resources, much more code samples. It can, and the main difference for me is that it can wrap a specific service. So as you can see, all these specific services have their own Android or iOS SDKs, which means they are wrapping up all the API calls. So it makes it easy for the developer to integrate without knowing all the backend logic. As an example, we have Dropbox. So it's so easy to integrate a Dropbox. For instance, if you want to upload a text file, you will only need around 6 lines of code. You are going to establish a session against Dropbox services and then just upload a file using 3 lines of code. You will not need to know anything about the backend JSONs and how to do the retries and any of that. Another example is one of the SDKs we were building. It's called Verify. It does 2FA mobile authentication. So from a developer point of view, you will only need to input a phone number of the user and then ask for a verification. And when you get the PIN code, the end user will just input that specific PIN code, and then, ta-da, you get verified. An SDK can also have like a bunch of reusable UI components. In this case, we had a couple of screens just for the user input, where they will input the phone numbers and then the code that they get via SMS or TTS or push notification. So let's start by putting ourselves from the user point of view. That means like the developer that is using our library. First things first, you will have to download a dependency from somewhere. So you will use like the central repo. One thing that you could do, you might choose to download, to use dynamic versions. So in Gradle, you just add the plus sign. So that means whenever there is a new version, you will get the newest without having to specify the exact version. This is an approach I don't like, because you will never know what has changed and when it has changed. So the same as us and Android developers, we want to know what the new Android version has come with, what are the new features, what features are deprecated, what is not backwards compatible anymore. That is the same. You want to know the same things when you have third-party libraries in your library or in your app. So I really don't like dynamic dependencies, because they can add behavior changes. They can add non-determinism to your build. Your build can break at any point in time without you even knowing. It can build on your machine, but not build on your teammate machine. And it's very difficult to revert. there is an easy way to fix it. The IDE it just has an autocomplete, so you can replace an autofix. You can replace with specific version. So we talked about how to manage and integrate these dependencies. So let's see, whenever you try to pull in a new dependency, what will this dependency come with? So it's not just the source code, it can also come with permissions. So whenever you will add a dependency, you are able to check in the manifest file. There is a tab for merged manifest. You are able to see for each of the libraries in your app, what are the new components that they bring in. So it might be receiver, it might be services, it might be even permissions. So in this way, you are able to filter out which permissions you want or which permissions you don't want to. So all the components from the manifest that come from a third-party dependency will have the lowest priority, and then they will get merged to the main app manifest. And then depending on how you do this merge, you will get a final Android manifest. So let's say there are some permissions that you would not like added to your app. What you can do is use the marker selector. So this means you can specify for which library coming from which package you want a dependency removed, or sorry, a permission removed. And there is another way of doing this. You can actually remove all the new stuff from the manifest of the new dependency. So you can just, in the Gradle.build file, you can disable the process manifest task, which means none of the new permissions will be added to your app. Okay, so we talked about the user point of view, and now let's move towards the creator, the developer point of view that creates the library. So what is an AAR actually? It stands for Android Archive. It was introduced in Google I/O 2013. So besides what a jar would consist of, which is the source files, it has the Android manifest. So that means you can wrap up services, broadcast receivers, permissions within your library. And most importantly, it has resources and assets. So when it comes to designing a dependency, what are the things you might want to consider? You have to make sure you don't take too much responsibility. Because for instance, you might think that some validations are mandatory, and you might try to do them locally on the client side without pinging the service. So I put here as an example. It's from the 2FA library. So let's say you initiated a verification, and then you're waiting for the user to input the PIN code. So because at that point in time, the PIN code size will be 4 all the time, you might be tempted to say, oh, if the PIN code is less than 4 digits, I will reject it. I won't send the request to the service at all, which might feel right, but actually what you are doing is that you are discarding future capabilities of the service, because the service might change. What if later on the service might accept six-digit pins? So if that happens, you will need to go back to your library, update it, and even more, if you have like cross-platform libraries spread it among different platforms, you will have to do the same everywhere. So this is one of the situations where it might be useful to do these validations on a server side and let the server side handle all the API rejections. Another example is that we have here from our conversation SDK. So we are building an in-app messaging SDK. So that allows you to send messages to a conversation you're a part of. So let's say you might decide that you cannot send empty payloads, because let's say maybe that is the server design at that point. But what you're doing, in fact, is that you are again discarding future capabilities of the server side, and you might want to make your library as lightweight as possible. By lightweight, I mean small code base and less network calls, like minimize the network calls, which is good, but not all the time, because in some cases, you want the server to to perform all the validations, because you want to be aligned with the server all the time. Another point to take into consideration will be the library size. So for instance, if you would like to format a number, you will be tempted to use Google PhoneLib that just formats the number and gives you the prefix, country code, and national format. But you have to be careful about the size that a third-party dependency will have. So in this case, it's not much, it's 500 kilobytes, but if you're going to use just one feature or one method from this dependency, maybe it doesn't make sense to include it entirely. Maybe you can just find an open source project with just that method, or just build that method if you have time for it. And then permissions. So we said that an AAR can also include will also include the manifest, so that means you're able to add permissions. But this is a lesson we learned. If you try to add tons of permissions to the dependency, that means the developer will be forced to use all your features. So why not let the developer choose what are the features they want to take from your dependency, and let them decide and ask for the user for specific permission. And also, they will be in charge of displaying a custom message depending on the flow of the app and of the context. And apart from that, your dependency will always have to check at runtime if the permission is still granted or not, because the user can always go back to the app settings and reject any permission they like to. What else? You can also have UI components packed with your library. This is an example from Digits. This is a 2FA library built by Twitter. This is now part of Google. So they also had like themes and resources and buttons that you can incorporate in your app. You can also customize all these themes as you wish. OK, so we went through the developer point of view and then the creator point of view, and now let's see how we can actually publish. I'm going to show you how we are publishing on Maven Central. Of course, there are tons of ways. There are many other places you can publish to. There are also like automatic publishments, but we are going to do it manually. So in case of Maven, you will have to update some Gradle files. So you will need the Gradle properties, and you'll have to update the build.gradle file with some tasks. I'm going to show you in a bit. So you don't have many requirements. You just have to set some variables. This includes like something called GAV. GAV coordinates, which means the group, which is your domain name. Artifact, which is the library name, and then the version name, of course. And then another mandatory point is the signing. You will have to sign using a GPG key. And you will have to provide some source control information, like where is your repository located, also some licensing texts, and some developer information. That is, I think it's optional. So this is like how a Gradle Properties file will look like. So you will specify the name, and then some descriptions, and as I said, the source control information, some links to your repository, and then some licensing information, some links to your license documents, and then just developer details. So when it comes to generating the Gradle task for uploading, it might be useful to create some helper methods that gets you all these variables that we've seen before. So you will start by gathering all these variables, and maybe also put some template values in case somebody forgot to commit the Gradle properties file. So then the only requirement is that you have to build the Java doc and then create the Java doc jar and the sources jar. And then you're good to go. You can start by creating your own task. So because we are using some plugins called Maven and Signing, this is all from there. So you will just have to specify all those required fields and then sign. So the only thing that you will have to do is to run the upload archives task in your console. In my case, I just use the Gradle wrapper. And then if everything is good, you will get a build successful. But this doesn't mean that your library is already on Maven. We've been using Nexus Sonatype. So Sonatype is just a repository manager. So after you upload the archives, that means that your repository will be staged. So you will find your staged repository in this Nexus Sonatype dashboard. So if you will go to staging repositories, you will likely find your own library at the bottom of the list. So from here on, there are only 2 steps required. You have to promote and release. I don't know if you can see there are 2 buttons here. So I don't know why they made 2 steps. So actually, they have promote and release, and there is a failing point between promote and release because they're doing some other validations. So the only error we ever got was Nexus complaining about us having dynamic dependencies. So they don't allow you to publish any dependency that has dynamic dependencies in it. So let's say everything went well, you released, ta-da, and then it should appear in a central repo in a matter of, I guess, 1 hour. The reason I put these two images here is that if you look up Maven, you will find these 2 sites. This is the official search point Maven, and the other one is a mirror, which means you will always get your library update slower in the second one. So always search for this one, for search.maven. It will get fresh data every time. Okay, so we publish. Let's talk a bit about versioning. So what is version? Version is just a way to encode the compatibility for the API. So it's a common practice to use semantic versioning, which means having a major, a minor, and a patch. Initially, if you start with a release, it will likely to be like 0.1.0 because you never had a major before, and you neither had a patch before. One point about deprecation. So if you're considering about deprecating a feature, you might think of doing a minor before and specifying what are the features that are deprecated to get the user ready, and then do another major release where the feature is completely removed. So that means likely your users will already be ready with the code change, and you won't break anything. Some fun facts about versioning. This is something I found on Wikipedia, and I hope they're right. So Office 2007 had an internal version called V12, but then, because of superstition for number 13, they moved to internal version 14. The same was with CorelDRAW and Corel Graphics Suite. They had a V14, but they marketed this as X3, like the X from Roman alphabet. And Nokia, I always wondered this. So they jumped from Symbian OS like S60 3rd edition directly to 5th edition for fear of number 4, which is actually called tetraphobia in East Asian countries. So that means number 4, the pronunciation of number 4 is similar to the word death. So they're really superstitious about this word. Like even in the elevators, you might see that they don't have floors that contain number 4 or floor number 4. I don't know if there are any East Asian people here that can confirm, but I guess it's true. Okay. Changelog. So I guess everybody is keeping changelog, so I'm going to go fast through this. So don't let your friends dump Git logs into changelogs. Why? Because the users that are going to read these changelogs are humans, they're not machines. So you want to bring this information in a human readable format. There should be a version for it, there should be an entity, a changelog for each version, and of course the latest version needs to come first on the top along with the date. So if there will be like a definition for changelog, it's just a file that contains a chronologically ordered of notable changes. Of course, you wouldn't want a changelog to contain a list of all the internal changes you made. you will only need to specify like the features, the public-facing API that has changed. It is also good common practice to group changelog by type. So you might have edit, which will have just the new features, changed that will have the features that have changed, fixed for bug fixes, removed for features that were deprecated and are removed now, deprecated for features that will get removed, security for any vulnerabilities, and one of the things that I like is having an unreleased section. So you get the users ready for what's up next, what are the features coming up next. If you want to find more stuff about documentation, there is this website I like called writethedocs.org. So they have a bunch of community that talk about how to write a good copy-paste demo, how to have good API reference. They talk about having advanced usage pages for your libraries, and so on and so forth. This is a list of references if you want to check it out. And I guess that's it. I will put the slides on speaker deck right after this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Any questions from anyone?
If you have any questions, I will be on Twitter.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.